Ever go in the woods of southeast Oklahoma? On a foggy day in 1970, a group of high school kids are cruising the back roads of southeast Oklahoma. One of the boys had to pee, so they pulled over. He got out of the truck, walked about 50 yards into the woods so that he couldn't be seen. He heard a tree snap, looked up, and he's staring in the eyes of a creature 3 foot taller than any man. It had matted hair, red eyes, and blood dripping off its chin. The boys ran as fast as they could back to the truck, yelling, "Start the truck, start the truck." But what happens next is terrifying. The boys go to the sheriff's department, and when the deputy goes out to investigate, all he sees is animal carcasses everywhere, and the legend of the Green Hill Monster was born.
This is the disturbing case of the body at the bottom of the pool. In 2011, 36-year-old Marie Joseph was enjoying a day out at a local swimming pool in Massachusetts. During the day, she actually went down a water slide and collided with a little boy. She had seemingly hit her head, and the boy decided to go and tell some lifeguards what happened. He actually told 2 separate lifeguards. The first one told him that he was on his break, and the second lifeguard just evidently did not follow this up. Marie's body lay on the bottom of the pool for 2 entire days. Marie's boyfriend reported that he felt like something was wrong when she was just not returning his calls or texts. What about the friends that Marie had been with at the pool that day? They realized she wasn't there anymore, and they just presumed that she'd left and gone home. 2 health inspectors reportedly visited the pool and found that the water was incredibly cloudy. They believe that this played a major role in why her body was undiscovered, just laying under the water for days.
Never go down Evangeline Road, Louisiana. 2015, a group of urban explorers go searching for a local legend. This creature is said to be the spawn from a satanic ritual performed by a group of outcast circus performers in the late 1900s. They were deep in the woods and night was fast approaching, so they decided to set up camp. But it's what happened when one of the explorers went to pee that sent shivers down my spine. It was way darker than normal that night. The man walked about 10 feet from the fire and behind a tree. But when he turned around to go back to camp, everyone was gone, and the woods was completely silent. He called up a friend to tell him what had happened so that if he doesn't come back, someone would know why. When the rangers got to the campsite, the scene was horrific. Blood and body parts were everywhere. What happened to the explorers, and why didn't he tell his friend that the others were dead?
Can you tell a place has a dark history just from looking at it? I'm going to be showing you photos from inside a place with a very dark past, and we're gonna see. This is a series, so make sure you're following along and remember this room. Some of you true crimers might recognize this place already, but this is the home of JonBenet Ramsey. JonBenet was just 6 years old when her body was found in the wine cellar of this house, which was this room. If something felt off when you were looking at this photo earlier, you were onto something. We're still not entirely sure what happened the night of JonBenet's death, but many people seem to think that the parents had something to do with it. And part of the reason is this green staircase right here. This is the staircase where an incredibly bizarre ransom note was found. This note was found on Mrs. Ramsey's stationery and was 3 pages long, meaning the killer was in the house for a while before getting JonBenet. And that's normally not the case with these kinds of crimes. People have also noticed that $118,000 is a very strange amount for a ransom. The Ramsey parents were actually cleared of the crime in 2008. And this home is now owned by a couple who, to no one's surprise, has completely remodeled it. I don't personally think that I could live inside this home, but let me know in the comments if you feel like you could.
This is a bittersweet case. On February 1986, 29-year-old Detective Stephanie Lazarus broke into her ex-boyfriend's house and murdered his wife Sherry Rasmussen in a fit of rage and jealousy. Stephanie successfully got away with murder for 23 years due to connections with the Los Angeles Police Department. Despite there being evidence against her, she was barely questioned. The crime was initially deemed to be a robbery gone wrong, but Sherry's family was convinced that Stephanie was involved since she was jealous that Sherry and John were happily married. When John returned home from work that evening, Sherry was found shot multiple times in the chest. Reports show that Stephanie had threatened Sherry at her workplace, stating, "If I can't have John, then nobody else will." In the meantime, Stephanie went on to start her own private investigation firm, and the case went cold. But 23 years later, on February 2009, a cold case detective squad decided to reinvestigate the case, and that's when they discovered that DNA was obtained from a bite mark on Sherry's body. And of course, that bite mark was a perfect match to Stephanie Lazarus. On March 8, 2012, Stephanie was convicted and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison and will be eligible for parole in 2039.
Disappeared after school, returned 4 years later, but different. Who am I really? You'd never guess who I truly am. My name is Kanhaiya Singh. After over 4 years, I suddenly emerged from nowhere. My father, drowning in relief, accepted me without any doubts. But my mother, she felt something wasn't right. There was this slight alteration in my behavior, an odd gleam in my eyes she didn't recognize. Even though I spoke, walked, and looked like her son, something was amiss. Whispers became louder, suspicions intensified. My father, however, refused to acknowledge this eerie feeling, choosing to believe I was truly his son. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, little nuances betrayed my true identity. Driven by her maternal instincts, my mother grew more adamant. When she demanded a DNA test, I staunchly declined, thickening the air with tension. The raw truth. I wasn't Kanhaiya at all. I was an imposter who had taken his place, living under their roof, deceiving his kin. How would you have reacted if you were in my family's position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments on my situation.
This is why rental houses terrify me. So Paula was staying at an Airbnb outside of Detroit by herself. Her job had sent her there for training. And immediately in the house, she starts feeling like something is off. There was always weird shadows outside the windows, and she would hear footsteps on the roof really late at night. She ends up locking herself outside of the rental the next day, but it's not a huge deal because the property manager actually lives in the house next to it. So she asks him about the footsteps she hears on the roof at night, and he says that they have lots of raccoons in the area, but she kind of knows that it's not a raccoon. He lets her back into the house and tells her that her keys are on the bedside table, which that's kind of weird. How did he know that? Another thing about the property manager is he's an older gentleman, so he listens to his TV on full volume like all night, and she can hear it from her house. So the next night, it's kind of the same thing. Weird shadows outside the window, creaking on the roof, and then her neighbor's insanely loud television. And Paula decides that she's had enough, so she opens her side door to go over to her neighbor's house to tell him to knock it off. And that's when she stops in her tracks. She can see his TV through the window. And on it is Paula, standing at the door, looking out the window. And then she sees him get up out of his chair, walk over to the window, and smile at her.
This couple tortured and killed their live-in nanny over a member of Boyzone. 21-year-old Sophie Leonette was excited to be working as an au pair in London. She was hired by seemingly nice couple Sabrina and Usem. Little did she know Sabrina had a dark side. Sabrina was very much in charge of the household, and soon this idyllic job turned into a complete nightmare for Sophie. She was barely paid and they started to abuse her. She was losing a disturbing amount of weight, and neighbours said that when they saw her she seemed down and depressed. Bizarrely, Sabrina mistakenly convinced her that Sophie was actually spying on the couple for Sabrina's ex, Mark Walton. Mark was actually in the original lineup of the boy band Boyzone, and this was completely untrue. The pair didn't even know each other. Heartbreakingly, police would later find an entry in Sophie's diary titled "Why Me?" The pair would beat her and whip her regularly. When neighbours noticed a bad smell and smoke coming from the property, they alerted police. Authorities discovered a grill with chicken on in the back garden, along with a burn pit, a human nose and fingers. The couple tried to blame each other in court, but ultimately they were both sentenced to 30 years in prison.
The CEO was charged for a murder that happened 30 years ago. On September 5th, 1992, 25-year-old computer engineer Lori Houts was found strangled and dead in her car in Mountain View, California. When Lori was found, the rope was still around her neck and her footprints were found inside of her car on her windshield. Police immediately put all their attention on Lori's boyfriend's roommate, John Kevin Woodward, who was 28 years old at the time. He became a prime suspect when police found out that he was jealous that Lori was in a relationship with his roommate. In 1992, investigators were able to find John's fingerprints outside of Lori's car, but they were never able to prove that he was inside her car. He didn't have an alibi for the night of Lori's murder, and they tried to convict him twice, but they were never able to because there was insufficient evidence. However, in 2020, investigators started to re-examine Lori's case and found more evidence against John. They analyzed 80 fingerprints and used new developments in forensic science to analyze the rope used in Lori's murder. This is when the test results indicated more fingerprints matching John's, and he was linked to the rope used in Lori's murder. At this point, John lives in the Netherlands and he's now 58 years old. And he's also the CEO of a tech company called Reed Tech. This guy was living the dream. But that all came to an end on July of this year when police were waiting for him at the airport in New York, and when he landed, they arrested him. He now faces life in prison if he's convicted.
I've been ordering the same pizza every day for 10 years until the employees uncovered this horrifying truth. Pizza! My name is John. For an entire decade, like clockwork, every evening at 7:30 p.m., I placed the exact same order from the local Pizza Hut, a medium-sized pepperoni pizza with an extra helping of cheese, occasionally adding a side of garlic bread. This ritual, for me, was comforting, predictable. Karen, an employee at the pizzeria, had also come to anticipate my daily call. She would even prep my order minutes before my call, knowing I'd be on the line soon. The aroma of my order became familiar, a reminder of a day ending. However, one fateful evening, the expected call from me never came. Silence. Not just for that day, but several days after. Concerned, Karen retried my number multiple times over the week, but was only greeted by my voicemail, which began sounding hauntingly empty to her. As days turned into weeks with no word, Karen's worry deepened. She recalled our countless short conversations, the times I mentioned it being alone, or the soft laughter we shared over minor pizza toppings changes. Unable to shake the bad feeling, she finally made the decision one evening after her shift to come check on me at my listed address. The streets were dim, with only a few lampposts illuminating her way. Upon arriving, a palpable sense of dread hung in the air. The windows of my home were dark, save for a faint flickering light, probably from a TV left on. She hesitated for a moment, took a deep breath, and knocked. No immediate answer, but from the depths of the house, she heard a muffled groan, an indication of something amiss. Do you want to uncover the mystery behind the door? Leave a comment for part 2 and don't forget to subscribe.
Lori Vallow, the Doomsday Mormon murderer, was just found guilty of killing her 2 children. And those aren't the only deaths she was involved with. So Lori had married her husband Charles in the year 2006, and together they adopted his grandnephew JJ. But over the years, Lori became obsessed with a man named Chad Daybell and his Doomsday Mormon influenced teachings. Remember, he claimed that he lived 31 different lives on different planets and that Lori herself had lived 21 different lives. So in February of 2009, Lori informed her husband Charles, remember they were still married, that she no longer cared about their son JJ, their adopted grandnephew. She claimed that she was the reincarnated wife of Joseph Smith, the guy who created Mormonism, and she vanished for 58 days straight. Now that month, Charles filed for divorce. He said that his life was being threatened. He said that Lori had stolen his truck, $35,000 had gone missing from his bank accounts. And he even sought a protective order against his own wife, meaning that his wife Lori could not approach him in any way. But then, on July 11th, 2019, Charles was murdered by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Apparently, Alex claimed that he had confronted Charles about abusing Lori, his sister. Charles had swung at him with a baseball bat, he had retrieved a gun, and he shot and killed Charles on the spot. Now, initially, the police did not pursue this matter any further, but in 2021, Lori was charged with conspiracy to kill Charles. Now, at first, no one really thought too much of this, but something was about to happen that would change the course of how authorities would view Charles's death. So Chad Daybell, the entire time that he had been preaching to Lori and connecting with her on this soul level, had been married as well. And a few months after Charles, Lori's husband, was shot and killed, his wife, Tammy Daybell, was also found dead. Apparently, in October of 2019, she was shot at by a masked man in her own driveway. Then, 10 days later, she was found dead in her own bed. And at first, her death was attributed to natural causes. Chad claimed that she had had a terrible cough the day before she died. But people questioned this immensely because at the time she had been training for a marathon, she was perfectly healthy, And just 2 weeks after she died, I mean, she was married to Chad at the time that she died, Chad went and married Lori Valo. So now, in a short period of time, both of their spouses had died under extremely suspicious circumstances, and they were married. But just a few months after her death, her body was actually exhumed because people weren't accepting the story. And it was just revealed this year during Lori Valo's trial that they discovered that she had been asphyxiated, so strangled by somebody else. But keep in mind, this entire time, Lori still had her 2 children, JJ and Tylee, to look after. So what were they doing? Well, both children had apparently disappeared off the face of the earth in September of 2019, 2 months before Chad's wife Tammy was murdered. Tylee had last been seen at Yellowstone National Park early in the month, and a few weeks later, the last video footage of JJ ever was recorded on a doorbell camera in his own neighborhood. On September 24th, Lori contacted JJ's school to let him know that she was withdrawing him. I'm going to run out of time though, so I have to do a part 3.
I had a message from this lady a couple of days ago, and I can remember seeing her in the news previously and being absolutely horrified by her story. This is Laura Galazi, and at 25 weeks pregnant, her unborn son was decapitated during his birth. Laura went into labour in March 2014 at Ninewells Hospital in Dundee, and she was assigned a doctor that would set in motion a series of events that would lead to the death of her son. Dr. Laxman decided on a natural delivery for Laura, despite the fact that baby Stephen was breech and absolutely tiny at just 25 weeks gestation. Dr. Laxman should have sent Laura for an emergency C-section, and that's what Laura thought was going to happen, but instead she was told to push, despite not being fully dilated. Laura was crawling up the bed to get away from Dr. Laxman, and she was pulled back down and told to push. I know exactly what it's like with your first baby and your first labour. You have no idea what to expect, it's scary, and you put your full trust in your doctors. You trust that they know what they're talking about. And eventually Laura did push, while Dr. Laxman pulled with excessive force on baby Stephen. Then Laura heard a pop. She had absolutely no idea that that pop was her baby's head detaching from his body. She thought that she'd given birth to her baby, and then she was put to sleep. While she was asleep, she underwent an emergency C-section to remove Stephen's head from her womb. When Laura woke up, she was absolutely distraught after learning about her son's injuries. His head had been sewn back on, and he was put on a board so she could say goodbye. She couldn't hold him, and she couldn't cuddle him. If that's not all shocking enough, nobody has been held responsible for Stephen's death. Because he was 25 weeks and he didn't draw a breath at birth, he wasn't legally a person. No crime was committed by Dr. Laxman despite the fact that she caused his death, and she was cleared of serious misconduct and allowed to return to work. Laura had baby Stephen cremated, and she keeps his ashes in a teddy bear so that she can hold him and cuddle him. Laura also created a petition which she'd really like you to sign. It calls for a change in Scottish law to make sure stillborn babies are given a legal identity. Currently, if a baby's born and they don't take a breath and they pass away, they are not classed as a person, they're not given an identity, and I think that's absolutely shocking. I've tagged Laura's account in the caption and also in the comments, and I would really appreciate it if you could go to her page, find the petition and sign it, because this really needs to change. You also need to go to your email and click the link in that email for your signature to count. Laura's petition is currently at 10,248 signatures, and I'm confident that with your help, we can get it past its next goal of 15,000.
You've probably seen Lori Valo and Chad Daybell around a lot lately on social media, but this is the full story in case you really don't know what's going on. So Lori was recently sentenced to consecutive life sentences in prison for the murder of her own children, the conspiracy to murder another person, and a slew of other disturbing charges. Lori was born in 1973 in California, and she's been married a number of times. Her first marriage was in 1992 to her high school boyfriend. They divorced shortly after getting married. Then in 1995, when she was 22, she married another man, William. She had a child with him, and then they divorced afterwards. In 2001, she married Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr., and they would have a biological daughter in 2002 named Tylee, who would be one of the murder victims eventually. After their divorce in 2005, in 2007, Lori's brother claimed that Ryan had been very abusive to Lori and the kids. And then in 2018, Ryan was found dead in his apartment from an apparent heart attack. When he was found dead, Lori was his only officially listed next of kin, so she was the only one that was notified that he had died. And it took 5 weeks for his family members to figure out that he was dead. It was in 2006 when Lori married Leland Valo, who went by the name Charles. Leland was a lifelong Catholic who converted to the Church of Latter-day Saints for Lori. Charles already had 2 children from a previous marriage, but he and Lori decided to adopt his grandnephew, JJ Valo, in the year 2013. And in 2014, he moved with Lori and the family to Kauai, Hawaii. So keep in mind that Charles and Lori had a perfectly happy marriage for a while. Charles had converted religions for Lori, and they had even adopted his grandnephew JJ, but there was a storm brewing. This is when Chad Daybell enters the picture. So Chad at the time was a religious author who wrote a series of books titled Standing in Holy Places. Lori became obsessed with Chad's books. She moved her family back from Kauai, Hawaii to Arizona in 2016, and in 2018, while still married to Charles, she went and met Chad at a convention. At this event, Chad told Lori that apparently they had been married in 7 different lifetimes, and afterwards the two began communicating privately. Shortly after Lori began communicating with Chad privately, her husband Charles went on a business trip, and this allowed Lori to host a private event at the couple's home. Chad Daybell was one of the attendees that Lori had invited, and he shared his bizarre religious beliefs with the group. Chad claimed that he had lived 31 different lives on different planets. He categorized people as either light or dark, claiming that they either had an affiliation with Jesus or Satan, and he even called Lori an eternal being of 21 separate lives. And this is where Lori really went off the deep end with Chad. They began talking, prophesizing about Mormon-influenced doomsday beliefs, talking about the end of the world coming, and Lori Vallow even believed in zombies, I'm not kidding. So the entire time that Lori was meeting with Chad and sharing these beliefs, Charles had no idea what his wife was getting into. And in the year 2019, on a random day, everybody's lives would be shattered. I'm running out of time, so I gotta do a part 2. Let me know if you want to hear it.
This is the story of Macy Hogan.
Breathing? No. She's not breathing at all? No. And how old is your daughter? 2. I need you to lie flat on her back on the floor. Can you do that for me now? Ow! Oh. Every time I move, it hurts. Right, but we need to help your daughter if she's not breathing. You need to lie her flat on her back on the floor for me, please.
That was the 999 call of Macy's mother, Cody Ann, and footage of the police breaking into her house. Cody Ann and Paul Hogan had been together since 2010, and 3 years into their relationship, Cody Ann fell pregnant. It was a shock to everyone as the couple hadn't planned on having a baby so young, but they were overjoyed at the fact that Macy was on her way, and she was born in March 2014. The relationship continued, but Cody Ann soon became possessive and controlling, cutting Paul off from family and stopping him going out. On the rare occasion he managed to take Macy to see his mum, he'd be bombarded with phone calls and texts from Cody Ann asking him where he was, when he was coming home. Eventually he had enough and he left the family home. It broke Paul's heart to leave Macy as she was a proper daddy's girl, but he thought that they could be better parents to her apart as the relationship had broken down. Just a week after ending the relationship, Paul's world came crashing down. His daughter Macy had passed away. He was arrested along with Cody Ann, but police soon released him after realising that he wasn't in the house at the time of Macy's death. Cody Ann told police that she'd woken up to find Macy in bed next to her, between 2 pillows and not breathing. The cruel reality is that Cody Ann had in fact suffocated her daughter and then waited 2 hours before calling 999. When police broke into the home, they found Cody Ann upstairs performing CPR on Macy, but it was clear to paramedics that she was already gone. Cody Ann had multiple self-inflicted superficial wounds to her wrists, neck and chest, and police found a note downstairs written by Cody Ann. It said, "I sit here thinking about killing my daughter and then killing myself. I don't want to leave her behind, but I can't go on either." Cody Ann stood trial for the murder of Macy in July 2017 at Stafford Crown Court. She was still denying murder, but faced with the evidence, including a text that she'd sent to Paul with a picture of Macy and the words, "Save the last photo, possibly see you in court," she broke down in tears in front of a shocked courtroom and confessed to murdering her 2-year-old daughter. On sentencing Cody Ann, Judge Michael Chambers said, For a mother to kill her very young child, who depends on her for protection above all others, is a wicked and appalling act. This is not a case where you suffered from mental illness. You thought about killing yourself, and then decided to kill Macy as well to prevent her from having a life without a mother. This was an expression of utter self-absorption. Cody Ann was found guilty of the murder of Macy and sentenced to a minimum of 16 years.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Best of 2020, 2021, and 2022. This video shows a man playing Dance Dance Revolution being unknowingly recorded by some people making fun of him. The man, Adam Lanza, 6 months later would shoot his mother in the head while she was asleep and drive to Sandy Hook Elementary School, where he would murder 6 adults and 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7. In the 1960s, scientists attempted to teach dolphins English. However, the experiments were cut short when one of the scientists, Margaret Lavatt, was caught having sex with a dolphin named Peter. She even claimed that Peter initiated it, and after she left, he killed himself. In the 18th century, you could actually bring your cat or dog to the London Zoo and pay your admission by feeding it to the lions. This photo shows 8-month-old Xiao Bao, who is lucky to be alive because his mother stabbed him 80 times after he bit her while she was breastfeeding him. A 46-year-old man found and attacked a 13-year-old boy because he was killing him too many times in a game of Call of Duty. There have been countless cases of people's intestines being sucked out by vacuum toilets on airplanes. So if you want to keep your rectum, be sure to stand up before you flush. A man once donated his recently deceased mother's body for scientific research. Later, he discovered the research facility sold it to the US Army for $5 grand, strapped it to a chair, and blew it up with explosives. There are some Native Americans that sided with the Confederates during the Civil War, and some of them even owned slaves. On New Year's Day, this guy was drunk driving with his friends when they ended up killing 2 people. He then posted this video destroying the memorials of the people they killed and posted it to Twitter, all because his murderer friends were thrown into jail. Yuroko Onaja was in the middle of having sex with his 6th wife when his other wives caught him and became jealous. They forced him to do it with each of them, and he stopped breathing before he could get to the 5th wife. You know that moment when you're about to fall asleep and suddenly you flinch because you feel like you're falling? This is actually known as a hypnic jerk, and it alerts your body that you're dying, or at least thinks that it's dying. This is former NBA player Mark Jackson's basketball card. In the background are the Menendez brothers. They're sitting courtside shortly after killing their parents and just before getting arrested. Right now, at this very moment, there are tiny little bugs munching on your skin. More people have tapeworms than have dogs, which I guess makes them the most popular pet. Oh yeah, and this is what they look like up close. You know how every few pistachios there's always one that tastes a little bit different? Well, it's because there's a dead navel orange worm inside of it. Every single day, someone takes the largest shit in the world and they have no idea that it was them. If you're ever eating crickets, make sure to chew them thoroughly and do not swallow them alive. They have tiny spines on their legs which can cling to your throat and choke you to death. And the most blood-curdling fact of all, this series is over. I'm just kidding, guys. I thought this would be a great chance to tell you guys that I dropped a clothing line called Look Behind You. I've been wearing the clothes all throughout the video. If you're into spooky, creepy, horror type stuff, this brand's definitely for you. Links in my bio if you want to check it out, and don't forget, look behind you.